glad you're joining us tonight. Hello, welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion or ask any questions, please feel free to put that in the comment section as well. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, we're still happy to answer your questions. It just may take us a little longer to respond. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with the mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find any value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website at communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is titled Power Tools Part 1, and our instructor is Mr. Lee Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, so much for being here. We look forward to learning more about power tools. It's all yours.
All right. So yeah, this is or like Diana said, if you have questions while you're watching this, feel free to ask those questions. We're going to be concentrating on the most common power tools. There's quite a few power tools out there. We're also going to be talking about a little bit of the difference between corded and battery operated tools, but we're going to be focusing more on the safety. So we're going to be touching on these tools, kind of going over each safety item as regards to them, and then on Power Tools 2, we will be going over more detailed of how to use them, tricks, and just how to be able to be comfortable with them. So I'll start this off with the safety side of things. So I'll say the first thing, I've talked about this before. You want a pair of good safety glasses. I've talked about these, and you see they have the safety rating, that Z85 right on there. So that's an impact rating. My safety glasses that I'm wearing right now are the same type as far as safety rating goes. And it's important to have a good pair of safety glasses so that when you're wearing them, it's comfortable. You're not always putting them up on your head. You're not taking them off for whatever reason. I even have pairs that have readers built into them, because I know a lot of times it seems like the older you get, the more difficult it is to read. So you can get those with readers actually built into them. So, I mean, there's a lot of different types of safety glasses out there. As long as they are rated safety glasses and they're rated for impact, that's what you want. And then the other thing is that you want to make sure that they're comfortable. So, and then taking care of them is a whole different thing. I mean, but you want to try to keep them from getting scratched up. Not a good idea necessarily to throw them in your toolbox or something like that, unless you have a hard case. I've seen some that are small enough to where you can put them in one of those hard cases that you can get for glasses and throw it right in your toolbox and have them right there. If you don't have, or if you have prescription glasses that, sometimes the prescription glasses, you can actually get a pair like this and they'll fit right over the prescription glass, and that's actually nice. Sometimes not. Sometimes you have to wear these goggles, and these can be a little bit frustrating. So I would say if you wear prescription glasses and you're having to go out and look, try to see if you can find a standard pair of safety glasses that will work over it, because like I said, this in a pinch works, but it in and itself has problems with fogging and other things, just comfort and stuff. So, but that is an option. If you just can't find a pair of safety glasses that'll work over your prescriptions that you're going to need to wear, you'll have to wear something like this. So this one's a little old and getting a little yellowed. Safety glasses are one of those things I would not buy at, like secondhand. There are too many issues that can go with them. They are stamped. If you look closely on the actual glass itself, it'll have that stamp on it, but that's one of those things I would go out and buy. Just buy it new. So the other you're going to want is hearing protection. And you can see right there, and I can't read it upside down and backwards, but you want to make sure that they're rated for that. Like I said, there are a lot of different types of hearing protections out there. You have some that are, these squeeze types you can fit over your, they're corded, so you're not going to lose them necessarily. You have ones that make it so that if you're having a conversation back and forth, you can hear each other and you're not constantly having to pull them out. There are some that, can be molded to your ear. There's a lot of different varieties out there. And you can have the good old standard of, just your earmuff styles. But again, as long as they're rated for that, that certain decibel. And to be honest, I don't know what that decibel is. Me being dumb over the years, haven't worn much hearing protection, and now I'm paying for it because I'm half deaf, maybe a little more than half deaf if you ask my wife. But so hearing protection is one of those things you're going to want to be able to make sure you have. The other is gloves. And the reason I talk about gloves with power tools is these are rotational tools. So meaning they have parts on them that turn. And it's one of those things where if your glove is big and it has a little bit of extra fabric on the end or even leather or something along that line, it can get tangled up pretty quickly. And I've seen some pretty horrific injuries just caused by that glove getting caught into that power tool. So it's one of those things where, you're handling lumber and everything else. Yes, you do want to wear gloves. But when you're starting to work with that tool, if you can, try to take those gloves off. And, it's the same thing with clothes, long hair, jewelry draping down, anything along that line. Anything that can really get caught up in that tool itself is potentially a hazard. So if you got longer hair, tie it back. You don't want to wear loose clothing that will, potentially drop down and drape down and be able to get caught in there. Like I said, any tool that moves is probably the best way to look at it as far as you want to kind of keep that in mind. Bracelets, that sort of thing too. So you just want to try to keep those to a minimum when you're working with this stuff. So those things right there, as far as your personal protection for yourself, pretty self-explanatory. I want to talk about safety for the tools themselves, and this is something that's usually not talked about necessarily. So, and I'm talking about corded tools right now. So if you're using a corded tool, and I'm talking corded tool, something that plugs in. So one of the things that is when you're using that tool, especially if you're using it outside, you should be plugging it into a GFI or GFCI outlet. And if you don't have one of those, you can buy what's called a 3-tap. It has a GFI plug built into it. And it makes it so that it turns a standard outlet into a ground fault outlet. So that, like I said, if you're working, like I said, you're working outside, you got damp weather, that sort of thing. It's just to help minimize electrical shock and stuff. So plugging that into a GFCI is an important thing. The other thing is with your tools, corded tools, you want to use the right power cord. So first off, we talk about this in other classes. This is a real common thing that happens right here. This is a good one right here. So you got a 3-prong outlet, hot, neutral, and ground. Same with this one, but your ground is missing. Technically, this one should not be used anymore. You should put a new male end on that. So that's one of the first things you want to look at. You also want to look, not that I'm saying this one is, but You also want to take a look at your female end of it. And what I'm looking at for there is, a lot of times this is rubber. This is a type of rubber or plastic. And if there's been an overload or something along that line, you may see melted around the edges. That's usually an indication that something's overloaded in it and may not necessarily be all that great anymore. So those things, and then you want to check the cord itself for damage, whether it's an extension cord or whether it's a cord actually on the tool. And I'll pick on this guy over here to show you more what I'm talking about. This is an old circular saw, and we'll talk about this one in a minute. But it had some old electrical tape wrapped around it. And if you look at that, and I don't know if you can see it or not, it's been nicked over the years. But it does not look like it really cut into the insulation in the inner cords. So that is one of those things. And like I said, it can be a cord for the tool, or it can be an extension cord that you want to look at. So I mean, a quick look. A lot of times I let my fingers do that work. If I feel a nick or something like that, I'm going to be able to look at it a little bit easier. It's just a lot easier. I mean, I can go through an extension cord pretty quick to be able to see, if there's any issues just by, throwing this thing down, especially if you haven't used it in a while, and just running my hands across it like this, and you should be able to feel that an inconsistency, like a nick or something like that. If you feel that, you want to squeeze it together, and you're looking to see if you see any of that copper wire in there. If that's the case, you don't want to use that cord. You want to tag it. You can tag it like this. You can buy, you can even tag it with just a orange piece of something bright, right on there what it needs, get it down and get it replaced. So you want to be able to check your cords for any damage, and then the cords also on the tools. So if I say, check your cords, that's kind of what I'm getting at. The other part of all this is what's called the strain relief. And again, this is corded tools. So this is a strain relief right here. What can happen with these over time? This is designed to it shouldn't be pulling out of the body of that tool. You should have, it should be relatively secure in there and not popped out, not cracked, that sort of thing. If that's one of those things you'd want to be able to take that tool in somewhere to be able to get fixed. Can you get into them and fix them yourself? Yeah, you can. Is it a good idea? Sometimes not. So it's one of those things where, it's iffy. Where I used to work, we would have to bring these tools. They had damage in them. We would find a local shop or something that was certified to work on them, that sort of thing, and then get them fixed. And a lot of times it's how you store that tool also, and we'll get into that also. So that strain relief on the cords themselves. And here's another one here. And this is an old tool that has that strain relief, but that's in really good shape. So this cord is actually not too bad. It's got that nick. It doesn't look like the wire or the wires, the insulated wires underneath that outer sheathing is nicked. So that wrapping them up, that's one of those things that you can do. If it really bugs you, you can have a new cord put on it. This is one of those things if you're buying one of these tools, at a garage sale or something along that line, you can take a quick look at some of these details to be able to tell. So here's another thing I want to talk about and I'm talking about corded tools. So when you look at this corded circular saw right here, you're going to see that it only has 2 prongs. It does not have a ground. Why is that? Well, if you look closely at this, you're going to see that box in a box. And I'll lean this up here. I'll let you zoom in on that. I'll draw one out. It's easier. But if you see a tool that has a box in a box like that, what that means is that it's a double insulated tool. In a sense, you don't need that ground. So that is one of those things that you want to look at. Most tools today are double grounded. But the reason I bring that up is this old beast. And I bet you money this thing runs too. There is no double insulated anything on there. It's not even mentioned on this. And I can also look at the cord and realize that also because it has a ground. Now, does that mean that it's bad? No. It's just understanding that. That if that tool is double insulated, it doesn't necessarily need that ground. So I've seen it where people, are, again, let's say at a garage sale or something like that, and they'll do a quick inspection of that cord and they'll look and they'll go, oh, it's a 2-prong cord. If it's a 2-prong cord, you want to make sure that it's a double insulated tool. If somebody were to say replace this cord because it had that nick in it, and they replaced it with a standard double like this with no ground, all of a sudden that tool isn't dangerous in a sense. So understanding some of those things, because like I said, a lot of these tools they're taken care of correctly, they're going to last quite a long time. So the other thing I want to talk about with extension cords, and I've said this before, when you're using your extension cord, I personally like a 12 gauge cord, 25 foot. I don't like really, really super long ones. You get into other issues with that. But usually the shorter you can get, 25 to 50 foot. Personally, I like 25. And the gauge is important. Why is the gauge important? It's the motor on that particular tool. If you have a really small extension cord, and I'm talking like 14 gauge, or like even an appliance cord or something like that, it's not meant to run a tool like that. Will it? Yeah, but it starves the motor, and it ends up shortening the life of that tool. So by having a 12 gauge cord, or at very best, or at the least a 16 gauge, that's what this one is, as long as it's relatively short, that works, if that makes sense. So, I have, at home, I have some heavier gauge cords, and that's kind of what I use them for when I'm having to run my tools and stuff, because again, I don't want to burn those motors out. If you're using it quite a bit, it can really put a strain on that motor and shorten its life. So, all right. So that's the rough basic as far as safety goes. Safety on your end, safety on the tool's end. So now let's talk about the tools themselves. Let's set this guy off to the side. So I'm going to talk about what's called a compound miter saw, and that's what this is right here. Some people call it a chop saw. Fine. This is when they say this is a 10-inch compound miter saw. They mean by 10 inch is the size of the blade itself. All right. So if you were to come on this side, you'd see that this is a 10-inch blade, and that's the size it would take. Sometimes they could be a little smaller. Sometimes they are larger, like a 12-inch blade or something. That doesn't really change much in how to use it and the safety aspects of it. It just makes it changes what you can cut, and we'll talk about that also. So compound miter saw, the miter part is this, where I can turn this, and it has set points where I can cut it at 45. I can cut at a 33 or 31, 30, 22 and a half, 0, or anything in between, right? So this is for if you're having to make those miter cuts, say like trim or something else around that. Usually this is probably one of the most adaptable tools. The more you use it, the more you understand it. So that's the miter side of it. And you can turn it this way. The compound side of it is this, where you can loosen this, and I can pitch this way at varying degrees, and that's what this reading is here, back here, for this particular brand, showing different bevel cuts that you can make. Usually, I don't suggest working with that until you are used to working with the tool itself. That adds a layer of safety concerns when you start doing that. And a lot of times you're able to be able to spin that wood around and make some of those same cuts with just this. Not always, sometimes. So the other thing is that you have these wings. Sometimes they have little pieces like this on it where it will help support your wood. So if you have a piece of wood or something along this line, you can set it up to where, this is sitting out and you're able to, you're able to. You're able to set it up, but I do want to show something. See how this one's set like this? See how it's riding off of that table right there? That's not a good thing. So in a sense, when you're working with this, you want whatever material you're working with to be laying down on the table itself. And that's what this part is here. So you have your table, and you have your fence, your adjustment. You also have these lines right here. These lines usually are representing that you don't want to see fingers or hands inside those lines. Say this is where the blade goes. Yeah, don't put your hands there. So, it's one of those things. How many times I've caught people holding something really small and trying to cut it. I've done it myself, and I usually get bit doing it. So the other parts you have on this tool are your upper guard. This is your upper blade guard right here. This is just exactly what it sounds like. It's just a permanent guard that makes it so that you're not going to be able to touch that blade. You have your lower guard on this side. You have this lower guard here. What that lower guard does is it's got a spring in there, and it makes it so that when you start pulling this down, the guard comes up and out of the way. But when you raise it, that guard comes back down to be able to cover that blade up. And it depends on the variety. This is one of those little details. With this, I probably could make this card go up if I really wanted to. I'd have to fiddle with this arm a little bit. Is that one of those things you want to be able to do? Most of the time, not. But if you're buying one, they usually have a display out there. Because one of the things I would suggest doing is seeing how easy you can manually tip that guard up. Because there are times, and I'm not necessarily supporting it, but there are times when you have to lift that just a bit to be able to start cutting something, depending on its width and stuff. So the lower guard, the operation, that sort of thing is one of those things you're going to want. A lot of them have a safety on it. So in this case here, this is your safety trigger. On this particular model, sometimes it's a little button on the side. And again, a lot of different varieties, but it makes it so that you can't accidentally just squeeze that trigger here and have that blade run. You have to engage that safety and then be able to pull that trigger. That is a good thing because, like I said, it's especially with the ones that have like a handle, like a grab handle like this. I've seen it where somebody is holding it like this, and they have their hands in here, and they may even have the blade down like this, trying to line up, say, a mark on the wood. Right? So let's say you have your mark on your wood, and you're putting your hand down like this, and you're moving it. I've seen people moving it like this, and all of a sudden, they squeeze that trigger. And and they lose a finger or something along that line. So having a safety on that is a good thing. If you're buying one of these used, those are usually the things you want to look at. You know, is my lower gate, is my lower guard operating correctly? Does it not? You know, does it? Sometimes they'll stick when they raise up. They're stuck in that open position. Sometimes somebody has disabled the safety trigger on them. It's just things like that you want to be able to look at. And the other thing is that is my table nice and flat, and can I actually move it? So with this one here, I've seen it sometimes where somebody's selling one, and it may have corroded or who knows what, and it just doesn't want to spin. So all of a sudden, it makes that compound miter saw almost useless because you can't do a miter. So you want to make sure that they can move and work the way they need to. Then this one here, I'll show you on this side, is this is a storage lock right here. So I pull this out, and it makes so the whole thing will raise up. And when I store it, I can push that in, and we'll keep that blade down. Not that they're always located in that particular area, but they're usually somewhere in that area. And then you got your bag to be able to catch that sawdust and stuff. So like I said, some of the basic parts on this with the my brain. When you're using that tool, I'm going to put a mark on this to be able to show you some things. So like I said, I'm not going to be running it, but I'm just going to be using this as an example. So I'm right-handed. So in my case, I have a tendency, I like to cut to the left of the line. You're going to want to be on this side. So when I have a mark or something like that on there, usually what I'll tell people is I want to see their hands open where they're not going to be able to accidentally squeeze that trigger whatsoever. And they can bring this down, and then they can move this, and I can put my point right where I want to on that mark. I bring it all the way up. I'm not going to cut because I don't want to mess up their carpet. I bring it all the way up. I make sure it's butted up against the fence like this. I make sure my fingers aren't inside that line. You got to kind of imagine that line's in here somewhere. I've got something holding it down. I'm also pushing it up against the fence here. When I do this, I'm going to squeeze that trigger. I'm going to let that motor get up to speed. And this is something we'll talk about in the next class. It'll talk to you. You'll hear it. It'll get up to speed. You're going to go through. You're going to make your cut. When you make your cut, you don't want to slam it down like this. You want to be at about that rate right there. And then back up. Wait for that motor to stop. It has what's called an electronic brake in it. So what it does is slows that blade down and stops it. And then you reach in to be able to get your pieces and stuff. But like I said, if you're, when you're cutting, I like to have it so my waist is on my right. Why? Well, there is a reason for that. I've seen people doing this sort of thing because they're holding it, and for whatever reason, they cross hand like this, and that's not a good thing because now all of a sudden you have this part of your arm that can potentially get zapped, cut pretty bad. So, like I said, generally, if you're right-handed, most of your weight is going to be on the right. If you're left-handed, your waist is going to be to the left. So, that makes sense. So, you just never want to cross your hands like that. And it can happen. So, it's one of those little details you want to be able to keep in mind. The other thing is that the other ideal thing is from this mark to where that blade goes. Generally, you don't want to try to cut something that's shorter than that. The reason is this blade runs this way. So when you're running, if you're holding a piece, you don't have much fence here to keep it. And what can happen is it can make it kick back. And the tool itself won't hurt you. It's more that what you're cutting is going to come back and fly back at you. And it's happened. I've had little pieces knock the wind out of me almost or smack into me, and it hurts. So it's one of those things that, it's a good general rule until you get used to it is to try to keep it longer than whatever you're cutting, longer than that mark to where that blade goes in. It's a nice way to kind of think about it. If you have a long piece that you're cutting, you can have either somebody holding it on that end, or you can have something stacked up so that if you don't want that board tipping up like this or tipping up like this, you want to have it nice and flat. But sometimes you need that extra support. You're going to want that. And sometimes you have to get creative. Blocks of wood, whatever. It just depends on how you're using this. Some people will set this up on a stand, like a portable stand and stuff. That's really nice. And it makes it so that you can fold all this up and roll it off into the corner of your garage or your shed or whatever, and store it that way. The issue is a lot of times, though, sometimes like this is just sits on its surface. And if you're going to be using it quite a bit, you don't run the risk of this thing working its way out. So sometimes what you want to do is, if let's say you don't have a stand for it, you set it up on, say, sawhorses or a table like this, and you don't want it to move, you can always have a couple of oddball screws of, say, some washers or something like that, and run some into that wood and in these holes, and it makes it so that it's just going to stay still where it needs to, and it's not going to be moving all around. The last thing you want is trying to stop this thing from moving while you're trying to make a cut. So it's one of those things. And, two, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your blade is in good shape. So when we talk about the blade, like I'm going to spend a little more time on this because this relates to most everything else. What are these called? Carbide tips, right? These little points right here. And, if you cut a nail or something like that, you might knock one of those off. So I'll take a quick look at my blade. And if I'm missing one or two of those teeth, it's not too bad. If I'm missing more than that, that blade is starting to get dull. Again, too, when you're cutting, it's just like a knife. If your blade is dull or you're using the wrong type of blade for what you're trying to cut, the tool is going to tell you. It's going to whine and moan and take a while to be able to cut what it needs to cut. So like I said, you want to make sure your blade's in good shape. So checking those carbide tips generally is an easy way to tell if that blade is in good shape. The other is the amount of teeth. So basically, the easiest way to think of it is this one is a 40 tooth, right? And that's going to give you a relatively clean cut, smooth cut. More teeth there are, the smoother cut there's going to be. That might be the easiest way to look at it. So, because when you go look at blades for something like this, there's going to be all different types. Most of the time, you have what's called a crosscut. They'll say a crosscut blade. If this were a standard piece of wood, your grain is going to be run along this way, and that's what they mean, that you're cutting against that grain. You're not ripping something. So a ripping blade may be a little bit more, but you don't need it on this because you're not going to be cutting with that grain. You're going to be cutting across with it. So a basic understanding of that. And most of the time you're able to ask whoever it is you're buying it from, whatever store and stuff, tell them what is going on, and they'll be able to help you do with that. They might say, hey, are you doing like rough framing? Are you doing trim work? That kind of dictates how many teeth are on the blade and how fine of a finish you're going to get, that sort of thing. So I want to point out a couple other little things with this. When let's say you're cutting a 45. So I'm going to lay that on there. I'm going to move this to my 45 and squeeze this. And it has that stop. You hear that where it actually fits in. I can sit there and tighten it down if I want to. So when I'm doing that 45 cut, This is where you want to think about what side of the line you're cutting on or how you measure. We talked about that in other classes. Um, most of the time, it doesn't make a huge deal. But in this case, I know how I measure, so I have a tendency to cut to the right side of the line. Other people want to cut to the left side of the line or take the line out completely. So when you're doing that, you want to be able to get that lined up and see where it is relevant to that line. Go up, get it started. What I have a tendency to do is I just have a tendency just to touch that wood, because sometimes this can shift a little bit when you're moving your hands around. So instead of just going for it, especially if you're doing detailed work, you just lightly touch it. If for some reason it's moved, get that thing back up, take your hand off, back it up a little bit, and just touch it again so that you can get it to where you want. You just never want to try to move that wood when that blade is touching whatever it is that you're cutting. So, and you always want to start it so that that motor can get that blade running up to speed before it starts cutting into something. I've seen it where people have it touching and they want to start that motor up, and that's not a good thing at all. So I could keep going on this, but we're running out of time already. So I'm going to leave that one alone. I want to talk about circular saw. So circular saws, all the same things pretty much apply. Cord that we talked about, you have an upper guard here. This is your lower guard on a circular saw. You have a handle here to be able to hold on to. This is your trigger right here. Most of the time, circular saws do not have some kind of a safety. Imagine there's some out there that might, but most of them that I've seen over time don't necessarily have a safety on it. So you got your trigger there. You can make bevel cuts with these. That's what this is for, where I can bevel this at whatever degree I want. That's a little advanced. Most people don't go into that necessarily. And again, usually this is designed for cross cuts, across that grain and stuff. What happens with this usually is, I forgot something else. You have your depth adjustment. So that's what this one's for. So, and they could be at various places, but what this does is it makes it so that you can adjust it to whatever depth. Take a measurement off this to the bottom of your blade. Let's say you're cutting something like flooring or something along that line, and you don't want it to cut too deep. So you'd say, I need it to only cut 1.25 inches, and you can measure off the bottom of this plate, get it to where you want, and then be able to lock that down. And that makes life a lot easier, especially for certain things. Same deals apply, anytime I'm having, I'm going to look at one of these. I'm going to make sure all of the lock points can actually lock. If I'm buying one, I don't like those wing nut ones, because if you're having to adjust it and you're trying to turn that wing nut, it can be painful. So that's why I like these lever locks, to be able to lock down, to be able to make those adjustments relatively quickly. Circular saws, when they rotate and they cut, they're spinning this direction. So that cut is cutting up like this. So when you run this, you can see how these blade points are sticking up like this. That blade is running like this. There is a reason I'm talking about that. So when you're using one of these, a lot of times people are using something like sawhorses. And a lot of the same rules apply as far as waste cuts and stuff like that. So again, I'm right-handed. I'm not going to actually use this, but I'm going to show you. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to make sure my cord, when it's plugged in, I'm not going to be tripping on it or anything like that. So I'm going to get that cord back off out of the way and make sure my safety glasses are on, hearing protection's in, that sort of thing. I'm going to figure out where I want to do that cut. In this here, you have guides here. And these can vary from saw to saw. So this is one of these things you get used to after a little while. So if I'm looking at this mark right here, On this particular saw, that blade is cutting to this side of that line. So sometimes you have to adjust. But what I'm doing actually is looking straight down through here. All right. They have they call it the standard saw. They also have what's called a left-hand saw. What I'm talking about with that is your motor is on this side. The weight's on this side. Your waist cut is off to the right. It makes it so that you're not fighting that extra weight of that tool. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in there, or I'm going to use my guide. You can see my finger's not on that trigger. I'm going to be happy with where I'm at. I'm going to back it away so that when that blade starts to run, it does not want to touch that wood, or is not touching that wood when I pull that trigger. Pull that trigger, let that motor get up to speed. I'm going to do my cut. I'm going to cut right through and push all the way through. Take my hand off that trigger. When I take my hand off that trigger, I put it up here on top. I don't leave it right here because sometimes just the weight of that will get it to kick off again. So I take my hand off that trigger, set that down. I make sure that the guard is not stuck in that open position. Sometimes you can get a little piece of wood or something stuck in there, and it will stay open like that. And the last thing you want to do is set that down somewhere, because it's going to go and fly across the floor. So, and if you do get something stuck in there, or for some reason you have to do something in there, always unplug that thing. The other thing is that when you're using this tool, the more you use it, the better you get with it and stuff. Usually what happens is people don't support things correctly. And the reason I'm showing this is that whenever you're cutting something, you always want that waist to overhang. You never want to cut in the middle. Why is that? What will happen is, let's say I was cutting in the middle like this. What's going to happen is that those two pieces of wood, as they get cut, it's going to drop in. It's going to bind that blade. And what will happen is that saw will want to what's called kickback, and kick back toward you. And that's not a good thing. So you notice when I was doing that, I make sure that when I'm cutting something, whatever I'm cutting, my waist cut, or however you want to look at it, is holding off the side. Sometimes it requires a little bit of intuitive, you may have a table like this. You may have to use a clamp or have somebody help hold the side. Especially if you're doing a cut where you have to do a long cut or something. That's what this is for, to be able to help keep control of that saw. So it frees up. It makes so you don't have a hand to necessarily hold your whatever it is that you're cutting. So figure that out. Is that another individual or a clamp or something along that line? And when you're using this tool, if it does start to bind, what you want to do is take your hand off that trigger, but don't let that saw go. You want to take your hand off that trigger, back it up just a little bit. You're not pulling it completely out of the wood. And you want that to calm down and stop. Then you realign and you finish with your cut. Like I said, you can get that binding in a couple of different ways. Like that one thing I was showing you where that wood is actually dropping. It's binding it on the top. Another way is, let's say for some reason you're pushing through and you tend to drift a little bit one way or the other. You will hear that saw and you will feel that saw starting to buck and fight. The blade sharpness is even more important with a tool like this, because you can be doing everything right, but if you're trying to cut with a dull blade, it's a bear. You're just sitting there like trying to force it. And with the way that blade runs, it wants to come backwards this way. So if you're fighting it and you're saying, I'm doing everything right, but it just doesn't want to cut, change that blade out. These blades are generally inexpensive. A lot of the same things we talked about with that big 10-inch blade are similar to this. It just depends on what it is that you're cutting. Half time, they're not necessarily even worth taking down and getting them resharpened with those carbide tips. You can usually find those at the store and be able to get. I usually have a pack of variety of different types that I have depending on what it is that I'm cutting. So the other thing is that your stance is when you're standing with this and working with this and using this tool. So remember I said you can do what's called a kickback where it flies back this way. You notice that I'm not right here cutting it because that could just be a bad thing. I've seen it where this gets jammed and for some reason something gets stuck up in there and then this thing kicks back and comes towards whoever's working on it with this blade exposed. You never know exactly what's going to happen with that sort of thing. So whenever I'm working with the circular saw, I'm going to be in a position where if it does want to come back, it's not going to get me. I'm going to make sure too that whoever's helping me is not anywhere near that area. So, and then the other thing, the most common thing that I've seen is your cord. If you're doing a long cut, let's say a piece of plywood or something along that line, I've seen people get caught up in the cord and actually end up hurting themselves. So you have to kind of think about how far am I going to have to reach? Am I standing on that cord? Am I going to get halfway through this? And all of a sudden I'm doing the dance of like my cord's wrapped around my leg or whatever. So make sure all that is squared away first. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is how big of a thing are you cutting? What I mean by that is you want to think about your reach. So if you're cutting just a little board, not an issue. You're cutting like sheet plywood or something along that line, and you can only reach this far. You have a question? Yeah.
We do have a question, Lee.
Oh, goody.
The question is, where can I get a tool cord replaced? Can I replace it myself, or do I take it someplace? And where could I get one replaced in the Kalamazoo area?
Yes, you can replace it yourself if you're comfortable doing that. You can take it to Kalamazoo Electric Motor up there on Mill. I think it's Mills, yeah. And they should be able to give you a quote on that. I'm sure there's other shops. I don't know if Gales does it. They might. I don't know if they do or not. It's one of those things you'd have to ask. But if you look up tool repair, Google search that or something like that, you should be able to find a place that would be able to change that cord out. Sometimes if the tool's under warranty, say, it may need to be gone through a certain certified repair place. Because a lot of times if you open up that tool and they're not a certified company, that warranty goes. So keep that in mind, I guess. So hopefully that answers your question with that. So yeah, a lot of things with that, with the circular saw, and a lot of different sizes. You can have, here's a little cordless one with a little, 5-inch blade on this thing. What is this? No, it's 5.5-inch blade. Yeah, it's pretty much all the same. This is where, you just don't have the cord on it. So this is a nice thing about having a, there's a safety on it that we were just talking about, is, not having corded tools just makes it a lot more portable. So that is your version of that with that circular saw. And I got to keep moving on some of these. All right. I want to talk about a Sawzall. So this is a Sawzall, or some people call it a reciprocating saw. This is more of a, say, a demo tool. I usually think of it that way. It doesn't have a lot in the way of safety. Yes, it has there's your little safety trigger right here. I can lock it or I can unlock it. But outside of that, it really doesn't have anything. It does have this boot. This boot is designed to rest up against whatever it is you're cutting. So let's say I want to cut something like this, right? I'd butt that boot right up to it. I wouldn't start it with that boot off of whatever it is that I'm cutting. I want to butt that boot right up and then tip your blade up, get it started, and start to cut in. So this is if you're doing demo work where you're having to cut out studs or metal pipes or whatever, this can do a lot of that work. But like I said, safety-wise, it doesn't really have much on it. Usually what I see how people end up hurting themselves is, again, how they have it. So if they're cutting over their head, they put their face right here, and it grabs, and it does this sort of thing. And I've seen somebody get hit. I've actually got hit like that too. And yeah, it hurts. So, I mean, a lot of it is how you're holding it. So if you're holding it, you're doing something. However, keep your body or your face clear, because this thing can grab and bend, or grab and buck back at you. Depending on what you're cutting, boils down to the blade. So you have bimetal blades. This is for cutting like nails, metal pipes, that sort of thing. And you have wood blades. They have a more of an aggressive tooth on it. The nice thing too is you can get longer blades that are flexible. So let's say you have to cut something flush. I can get this blade and bend it like this and turn it on and make my cut just like that, cut through whatever, and I'm not really taking off any material whatsoever. It does have what's called a variable speed trigger, meaning the harder I pull it, the faster that blade's going to run. So I guess a lot of these tools have that, certain tools. So Sawzall is one of those things where the more you use it, the more you realize how handy it is. You can also rent these too. So like I said, Sawzalls, reciprocating saws are great for that sort of stuff.
We have another question, Lee.
Okay.
Are there certain brands of power tools that you recommend, or brands that I should avoid?
Hey. So brands. A lot of that boils down to it boils down to one, whether you're using cordless or corded tools. That's one of them. If it is for home use, usually I'm going to steer away from some of the larger brands like like Porter Cables or DeWalt's or something along that line, just because they can be expensive, and they're really set up for people who are out in the field using these things every day and dropping them off a roof, dropping them off a ladder, constantly using them. They want them to charge up real fast. They need to be able to deal with a lot of different environments and stuff, and you pay for that. For home use, some a Ryobi or Black & Decker or something along that line is going to cost you a lot less, and it's going to do pretty much everything you want it to do. But it's sometimes you're paying for that name, and I'm not saying that it's bad necessarily, but you have to think of how you're going to be using it. So you want to look at what features they have. I mean, if you're talking tools like this and stuff, there are a lot of different features on each one of these tools. We could get into just this for an hour and a half, just talking about the different features on it. You have to look at it in the sense of, do I really need that? And you can also talk with other people that may have had it. You can even rent one. Sometimes that's easier instead of just going out and buying that tool. So hopefully that answers your question with that. It's kind of a personal preference thing, but yes, I would say kind of steer away if you're doing it for home use from the big name brand ones, and stay with some of the smaller brands. And a lot of times too, especially like with the cordless tools, you end up paying a lot for how quickly the batteries charge up, how much torque they have, how long they last, that sort of thing. And, if you're not using it day in and day out, and it's not a time is money sort of issue that you're working with, that could be a whole separate thing. So I'll talk about these two. And I don't have a ton of time to talk about these, but I want to talk about your cordless tools. I used to say there are two types, but I'm not going to say that anymore. Pretty much there's about only one type, lithium batteries out there. You will still find possibly NiCad batteries at, say, like a garage sale or something like that. And what I'm looking for is, a lot of times you can tell a NiCad battery because Look at the size and the weight compared to a battery like this. So this is your older NiCad battery. This is your lithium style battery. If you find old NiCads, I wouldn't get them. I really wouldn't. They haven't been made in so long. A lot of times you may see them at garage sales or something like that. Right, the batteries can be extremely expensive, and that's usually what you're paying for. So most of the tools, if you're going to buy them, you want to buy lithiums now because, like I said, that price range has gone way down. As far as probably one of the handiest tools is your drill driver. That's what this is here. And again, this is a porta cable, but like I said, there are features on this. So what you want, I would say, one of the first features you want a little light. That's really nice, believe me. The other is you want to be able to put, this is your chuck. This is a 1/2 inch opening, and then you have ones that are only like 3/8 by the 1/2 inch. It makes that tool so much more usable as far as what you can put in there to be able to use drivers, drill bits, all that sort of stuff. So get the larger opening. You have what's called a variable speed. I was talking about that with that. So most of them now have that, where the harder I pull, the faster that drill is going to be able to run. You have this on top. What this does is it makes it so that one is a lower setting for driving. It runs it at high speed at a lower speed versus high speed for drilling and stuff. So that's usually what this is for. And there's variances on that. The other is what's called a clutch. So that's what this is. So you probably can't see it necessarily, but there are numbers on this. A little arrow. What this does is it makes, let's say you're running in screws or something along that line. And we'll get into more of this when we're actually working with these. You can be screwing a screw in, and you set this clutch to whatever desire you want, and it makes it so it stops driving that particular screw in once it reaches a certain amount of resistance, so you're not overdriving that screw. So a clutch like that is a good thing. Past that point, sometimes you're going to find ones with huge batteries. Again, usually those are designed for people who are out in the field and don't want to be constantly charging their batteries up. A small battery like this, or like a little Ryobi or something along that line, goes great. The other thing about cordless tools, especially ones like this, is a lot of times if you stay within a certain brand, those batteries are going to be able to be switched out to other things. Lights, Sawzall, circular saws, a whole list of tools. So that's sometimes if you're going to be buying tools and you want to go with cordless, see what other tools can be used with the batteries that come with, let's say, a pack. So if you buy a drill driver along with, say, a circular saw or something like that, there should be a wide variety of other tools out there that those batteries will work with. Sometimes, too, you want to look at, if I have to buy a battery on its own, how much is that going to cost me? Sometimes that's a limiting factor. I have some of these where, the tool itself versus how much the batteries actually cost more than just buying the tool. So like I said, a lot of little details with those sort of things. But like I said, drill drivers are super great. And I've run out of time. So
I hope everyone was able to learn some things tonight. And I also hope that you will join us next Tuesday when we do part 2 of Power Tools. You can join us again online, or you're welcome to join us right here at the Education Center, 812 Bryant, Kalamazoo, Michigan, right at Community Homeworks. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.